Happy Monday, guys. If you are listening to the audio version, I am not alone today, and that's also if you didn't read the description. But welcome to the Tin Roof Podcast. We have with us today. He is a rally car driver. He is a I don't know if this is an actual word or not, but I feel like I've heard it before. A Michigander.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying that correctly. Then he is a part of the National Guard. So
Yeah.
there's that as well. And a writer, much like myself. So we have a lot that we can talk about. Oh, also, I almost forgot one of the biggest links to the show since we are a music. Yeah, I use that loosely because we talk about whatever I want to here. But he is a massive Bob Dylan fan. So he is very, very qualified, if you will, to be here on the show today. Uh, please welcome Andrew Layton. Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
No, hey, thank you so much for having me, Justin. I'm really looking forward to this. I will talk anytime to anyone for as long as they want about rally, writing, auto racing history, any of the topics you mentioned. So this is a real treat, and I really appreciate what you're doing here and for having me on the show.
Well, we'll just go ahead and get right on in this stuff because you have been getting ready for a rally coming up next weekend. However, you're going to have to help me explain this here, but what you're going to be doing is different than regular, like I use that term, I guess, loosely because there are two different forms of rallying. There's stage rallying, which most people would know from playing different video games and stuff like that, like Dirt and WRC, and even watching rallies where it's a point A to point B race, whereas what you're doing is a TSD, which is time, speed, distance. Yes?
Absolutely, yep. And that's a really good place to start, I think, Justin, because as you point out, rally is a pretty popular sport globally. Probably not as much in the U.S. as in places like Europe, but it's still a very wide field, and there's lots of ways to get involved. So if anybody out there, maybe even yourself, is thinking in the back of their mind, "Gosh, I really would like to get into rally, but I don't know how." There's a way. There's a way. So I'll try to explain it the best I can because, like you said, there's stage rallying, which probably is what comes to mind when they think of fast rally cars going down forest roads as fast as they can, flat out. And those are events that here in the United States are typically going to make up the American Rally Association Championship. It's the ARA. So, you see guys like Travis Pastrana running those type of events. Ken Block was very involved. And then there's also other types of rallying, right? So there's the TSD rally, time, speed, distance rally, which you mentioned, which is actually how the sport of rallying developed, particularly here in the United States. And I'll get into a little bit more about the development of the sport later. But basically, a time, speed, distance rally is about arriving at the right place at the right time over a course that can be very, very long and complicated. There's a driver and a navigator, just like there are in a stage rally. But you're communicating, trying to stay on the course to arrive at the right time in the right place. So you're not going as fast on a TSD rally. The roads are not shut down typically. So you're out there adhering to all of the traffic regulations, but you're talking about an endurance event that sometimes can go on for 8 to 12 hours, sometimes a couple of days. So TSD rally can still be a very significant challenge. Right now in the United States, the SCCA, or the Sports Car Club of America, is very active in organizing TSD rallies. So that's a great way to get involved. And then the SCCA also has a rally cross program, which is basically like a scaled down stage rally stage. It's usually cones, out in a field or on maybe a closed dirt track. And the idea is to just run as fast as you can. It's one car at a time trial style, similar to an autocross if you're familiar with those type of events on tarmacs. But still a great way to learn car control and familiarize yourself kind of with the sport and some of the cars and what it's about. So there's lots of ways to get involved. I've been very fortunate to participate in all the types of rally that I mentioned. And then a few others, some hill climbs and some other stuff. But you're right that next weekend we're preparing to run the Son of Snowdrift TSD rally, which is put on by the Detroit Sports Car Club of America region, out of the Detroit area, and that should be a fun event. It's about I don't know, it usually goes 8 to 10 hours, I think, in length, and it's a fun event. We've done it a few times, so it's a great way to kind of get geared up for the season. This year, we are not going to run the Snowdrift Stage Rally. Unfortunately, it's typically held in February in Montmorency County, Michigan, which is northern Michigan, northern Lower Peninsula. For those that might not be familiar, but that's also a great event. We were there last year. Last year, frankly, it was just a tough year for us on the mechanical side. We had a couple of DNFs. We've got some engines strewn about the garage, so we decided to take this year off at Snowdrift to prep and get ready for our next stage rally event, which I think will probably be the Lake Superior Performance Rally coming up in October in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So when I reference we, also I should mention that that's my dad and I who run the rally car. So this is something we've been doing for a few years now together, and it's a great way to bond. You know, it's good for our relationship. It's also a great way to connect with others in the rally community, and we have a lot of fun. So I'll probably go into more about how we got started rallying together, but I figure I'll stop there if you got any questions, or if you could correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff also.
Well, I haven't heard anything wrong yet. I did have a question though, because like obviously
Yep.
with being a rally fan like I am, I've talked about a couple of the different events here in the States,
Sure.
just recapping and talking about different news and everything like that on here. And for those that don't know, the Snowdrift Rally is actually the only event here in the United States that is a snow rally, whereas you're still driving on gravel roads, but it's covered in snow, and usually it's snow packed at least to a point. But my question is the Son of Snowdrift that way, or is it more cleared roads because you're running on regular roads?
Yeah, I mean, so the Son of Snowdrift Rally, it depends on what the conditions are like. Yeah, so it looks like right now we've got quite a bit of snow up here. So I think we'll have some snow for the event, but it's just like driving on the public roads, in whatever condition you're going to find them at the time. So the interesting thing though about the Snowdrift Stage Rally that you really, I think, like it's really worth pointing out is that unlike winter rallies in Europe or other places around the world,
I
you
was going to
cannot
go to
run
this.
studs on your tires. Yeah, so no studs are allowed on winter tires in the state of Michigan, and that's where because the rally goes from closed stages, one closed stage to another, but it uses public roads to get there. You have to adhere to all Department of Transportation regulations. So actually, no studded tires at the Snowdrift Rally, which makes it super interesting. There are guys that come over that have run WRC events in Europe, even in Sweden, and throughout Scandinavia, and they say that the Snowdrift Rally is right up there in terms of a challenge because you just cannot rely on the grip that you would normally have with studs on the tires. So going back to the history of Snowdrift Rally, early on during the stage rally heritage, I guess, of the event, from 1973 to 1975, the event was part of the SCCA Pro Rally Series. And at that time, you could run studs in the state of Michigan. So it started out being, legal. And then it was about 1975 that those rules changed within the state of Michigan, and Snowdrift actually paused for a couple of years. There were some other factors on the event organization side, but the inability to run studded tires was part of it, though, because people thought, how are we going to be able to do an event like this? And then finally, when the event picked back up in 1979, they said we're gonna run the event without the studs, and we're just going to have that extra challenge to make the event unique, and it remains that way today. So definitely a unique event, a lot of fun. Like I said, we've been there a couple times, and it's always an adventure because you just never know what you're gonna encounter on the roads. But that's one of the things that I've always been drawn to about rally is that it's like a question. Every corner you only get one shot at, unlike track racing where kind of repetition or perfection is rewarded lap after lap after lap. Rally, you only get one shot, and there could be thousands of turns, You only see them once, and it's like every turn is a question, and you've got to have the answer ready. It keeps you very honest, and that's one of the things
See,
that I think is so appealing about it.
I saw a funny meme. It was on Reddit and it was in a
Yeah,
WRC one, so it was in kilometers and stuff like that. But it was doing a recce in a Fiat at 50 miles, 50 kilometers an hour, and it was like, I bet I could take this turn at 180 kilometers an hour. And it's like, yeah, I mean that's pretty much what recce is like. I mean, at least from even just being a fan standpoint, is you go up to it and you check. Oh, that's a six right. And it's like, all right, well, I could probably do that pretty wide open.
yeah. It's always different though because you go through recce. Number one, you're not in your rally car. You could be in a truck, you could be in anything, but not your rally car. And then of course the conditions are going to change a lot from the time you go through initially in recce to the event. And then like for us, typically we're toward the back. We're not one of the top guys. We're not running a turbo engine. We have a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated Subaru. So typically in the back, we are encountering in an event like Snowdrift a lot of packed snow and ice. So it's usually pretty slick, and that's where the conditions are always different. So typically, what you think you can run in recce, at least for me, knowing the limits of both myself and the car, usually it's like, okay, whatever you think you can run in recce, maybe dial it back, just a little bit, to be conservative. And that's where we're not out there to tear up the car or hurt anybody more than we can afford, because this is my dad and I having a good time, and nothing is worth putting one of us in the hospital or ending up with
Or even
repair
a
bills.
spectator.
Yeah, yeah, or yeah, exactly, put endangering somebody else's life, which is very possible also. So we're pretty conservative, but with all that being said, it's still a remarkable challenge, and it's a thrill just to be out there. And the sportsmanship is great. The community is amazing. And I don't know that there's another type of motorsports, that is as accessible as rally, both for fans, spectators, and then competitors also. Because here, you got people like my dad and I who are basically nobodies. We show up with our U-Haul trailer and and our Subaru, and then Park Expose, Travis Pastrana is standing right over there, and a lot of other extremely talented and accomplished competitors. So the chance to see them doing their thing, at the professional level is pretty awesome, and I think it's humbling, and it gives me a lot of respect for people that really, really know how to maximize the potential of their car, because it's like magic watching these guys do their thing sometimes. So I
It
just
really
think
is.
if you're yeah. Oh, yeah. I do not know how. And then you watch WRC, and it's just like I don't know how these guys do it. Sometimes it's amazing, but I just think again, if there's anybody out there that is interested in rally, that wants to get involved, I cannot encourage enough. Just going out, going to an event, volunteering. There's always a place to get up close to the action, to get up close to the cars, see what it's about, or even just reach out to a team. We've had people that have just reached out to us. Either we meet them at a Park Expose, or they see us on an entry list. Shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook and say, "Hey, I'm interested in working on your car. Do you have a place?" Absolutely, come hang out for us. For a weekend with us, and as long as you're willing to turn a wrench, and we'll pay you in burgers and take care of you for the weekend. But it's a good time, and again, you're there. And I don't know that there's another motorsports venue that's quite so accessible like that. So lots of opportunities. And again, we're talking about stage rally right now. You've got rallycross and TSD rallies that are also, a way to get seat time and get the same skills regarding car control and, again, the driver navigator communication on a very low overhead. So lots of
Well,
ways to do it.
and you brought up rallycross, and so the SCCA has chapters all across America. I know there's a St. Louis one right here in Missouri,
Yep.
and with this one, I know there is a rallycross section of it, and I think it's based out of, if I remember correctly, may have moved since the last time I looked. So people do your research, but The one here in Missouri is in like Troy, Missouri for the rallycross, if I remember correctly. And it's one of the ones, like you said, that would be like set up in a field or whatever. Um, but there are those opportunities throughout the states where you can do rallycross. Actually, a guy I work with bought a Subaru wagon for like with
Yeah.
the intent of rallycrossing it, and then I don't know about like if there are any TSD rallies here in Missouri, but I'm sure there is because we have an SCCA chapter, which is really cool about the
Yeah.
SCCA because like they handled stage rallies at one point along with the TSDs and the rally crosses.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, I mean, again, I'll just share some of my own experience, but if we're talking about, a way to get involved at very low overhead, I mean, like really, you just need a car. You need a serviceable vehicle that you're willing to take out in the field and thrash around a little bit to run a rallycross. I know in the Detroit region, they even have helmets that you can rent or that they'll loan to you. So you have to wear a helmet, but you don't necessarily have to show up with one in your hand. And again, my own experience, I have rallycrossed, I should say. My wife's Honda Civic. I have rallycrossed my wife's Mini Cooper. I've had two different Subarus, that I've done it with. Now, I am not saying or recommending that you should rallycross your wife's daily driver. There's a big difference between could and should, but that's just again the level of accessibility that it offers, and you can go around, you can hang it loose, and throw some mud and have a good time, and meet a lot of people that are involved in stage rallies. So that's again a great place to meet potential competitors where you could work on a team or something like that and get into the stage rally scene through rallycross.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
And
SCCA
so
is an awesome grassroots venue for sure.
so no roll cage necessary for rallycross. Just a helmet.
No,
Do you even need a fire suit?
no fire suit. You need a serviceable vehicle. Again, windshield wipers, headlights, because they do run after dark. Seat belts. You need to have your lug nuts tightened, your battery fastened, and everything. So there's a tech inspection at the beginning, but no roll cage. Again, typically you're not going to be exceeding normal street speed limits, even though you might be in a field, and you go out and have fun. So it's definitely like I said, great way to meet people. The community is awesome, and the passion is always there at the grassroots level for sure. Definitely, a lot of people very passionate about what they're doing.
Now, let's look at the history side because you are a fan of like the
Sure.
history part of it, much like myself. Um,
Yeah.
there are a few guys like you brought up the snowdrift started back in the what was it, the 60s, you said, for snowdrift, right?
Yeah, so Snowdrift itself, yeah, Snowdrift was first run as a TSD rally actually in 1963, and then it was held a couple of times sporadically through the 1960s, and then morphed into a stage rally. And then, like I said, it was actually the first event on the 1973 SCCA Pro Rally schedule, which was the first kind of organized stage rally championship in the U.S., which is now, again, through several iterations. It's what we know as the ARA National Championship basically today. But yeah, going into the history a little bit, there were a couple of guys in the Detroit region that were pretty instrumental in the growth of rally, not just in Michigan, but nationally here in the U.S. And those two guys were Scott Harvey and Gene Henderson. So they've been referred to as the Lewis and Clark of American rallying by John Buffum, who of course is a very accomplished rally legend in the United States. So Gene Henderson and Scott Harvey were, they started out, they were not professionals necessarily. Gene Henderson was a cop in Dearborn, Michigan, and Scott Harvey was an engineer for Chrysler. But they were involved in SCCA racing. They started out doing road racing and then both got into rally eventually. And particularly the story about Gene Henderson getting into the sport is kind of funny because he's a cop and he had to drive his patrol car, but he really actually struggled with driving the patrol cars, especially in high-speed chases. So he took a racing school course at Waterford Hills Road Course outside of Detroit to improve his skills in the police cruiser, and that's how he got hooked on race car driving. But anyway, this was all happening in the late 50s. So we're talking like 1957, 58, 59, they were getting involved. Now, in the Detroit region, there was an event called the Press On Regardless Rally that had been around for about 10 years at that point. The Press On Regardless Rally started in 1949, and it was a TSD rally staged by the Detroit Region SCCA, basically as kind of a color tour, or it was like a Sunday afternoon drive where you can go out, take your sports car or your custom, hot rod or whatever you have. Maybe take your wife with you and your kids, go out, look at the colors, and drive around southern Michigan. So not particularly challenging in terms of a rally as we would think of it today, but a fun event, an event that a lot of people ended up really looking forward to every year in the SCCA community. The name Press On Regardless was really popular, and the name frankly helped the rally grow a lot because kind of explained what it took to keep going, because it was a long event. Even though it may not have been intense from a speed or competition perspective, it still was long. So the name though goes back to some Royal Air Force flyers during World War II who came up with the slogan as a reference to Winston Churchill's speech where he said, "Never, never, never give up." And the SCCA at the time thought that was appropriate because a lot of the cars that were entered were British sports cars like MGs and Triumphs and things like that. So a little bit of heritage going back to England with the name. So anyway, the Press On Regardless rally got started. By the mid 50s, it was moving up to northern Michigan, and in northern Michigan, the roads, are notoriously, more adventurous, we'll say, than they are in southern Michigan. And so they started getting out on some of the logging trails, some of the dirt roads, and the aggressiveness of the rally escalated. They also worked in a couple of years road racing elements where they would go to an airfield. Actually, they used a Michigan National Guard airfield for a couple of years, and they would have time trials and then add those scores into the rally overall. So you're looking at a few different iterations for the first 10 years of Press On Regardless. Scott Harvey and Gene Henderson came in about, like I said, 1959. In 1960, they ran the Press On Regardless rally as a 24-hour event, which was a really big deal at the time. Very, very ambitious. And they prided themselves on putting on rallies that were tough. And so within a few years, they're kind of rivals, kind of friendly rivals starting out. They decided to go to the Monte Carlo rally together and compete, actually, to see what rallying was all about in Europe. And I like to tell this story a lot because I had an opportunity to actually sit down and talk to Scott Harvey a little bit before he passed away. He was quite elderly, but he still remembered a few things, particularly when he was looking at pictures and stuff. But I asked him what it was like going to Monte Carlo. And, of course, at the time, the Monte Carlo rally is the biggest, most glamorous event in Europe. You've got a lot of the factory teams there. It's a multi-day event. And, and Scott Harvey and Gene Henderson showed up basically as these two Americans with a Plymouth Valiant. And, they were going to give it their best shot. But they were not at the level of preparation that a lot of the other competitors were at. So Scott said, when I asked him what it was like going to Monte Carlo, he said, well, it was a bunch of hoopla. And that's where they realized that, yes, there was all this infrastructure and there was all this fanfare over the Monte Carlo rally, but the actual condition of the roads and the challenge of the event was less than what they felt they could put on in northern Michigan because the Monte Carlo rally was all paved. So they came back to Michigan basically with the idea to transplant European-style stage rallying to the U.S. And you got to remember, up to this point, all rallies were TSD events still, in varying lengths, but they're all on public roads. They're not shutting anything down, and they're always observing the normal traffic regulations. So they increased the difficulty of the POR, and they got really creative trying to work around, the the concept of TSD rallying, making the events as fast as they could. And what it ended up being for a while, particularly in the late 60s, it was like they would set an average speed, that you had to maintain to get to the checkpoint when you were supposed to. But that average speed was impossible to hit. So you're basically driving all out, even though they were still able to keep it under the speed limit, so to speak. Finally, in 1968, they worked with the counties in the state to shut down one road and run the very first stage in U.S. rallying during the Press On Regardless rally. And that was on a stage called Connors Flat outside of Grayling, Michigan. So that one road in particular was the beginning of stage rallying as we know it today in this country. The 1969 POR had 4 stages on it. And then in 1970, the POR went to a complete stage rally. That was also the first year that they had an FIA sanction. And then, again, the event is growing. They're getting more competitors from around the U.S. and even some international entries. And then in 1973 and 74, the POR became part of the World Rally Championship, which was pretty awesome to get a U.S. rally, into the championship of that caliber. There were some issues with the 1974 rally. Maybe I'll stop there, but I guess going back to the beginning, that's kind of the development of rallying in the U.S.
With with the 2 years for the WRC rallies, how did that exactly come about? Because obviously 71 it was sanctioned, 72 it was sanctioned, and even part of the manufacturers championship. But where even at that point, if you look at all the other countries that are involved in that, the prestige is there, that were there from the beginning in those other countries, like Portugal, Monte Carlo, like we had just said. I mean, the list is almost endless because Finland, obviously, it's basically where rally originated from, and then we have America. So, how did we end up on that schedule? Because it's almost like oddball in a sense.
Yeah, I know for a fact, talking to people that were there, that it was a huge effort. This is again the Detroit region SCCA that's driving a lot of this growth, and it's a very ambitious thing to put on any stage rally, let alone an international level event with volunteers. And that's what all these guys, Scott Harvey, Gene Henderson, they all had full-time jobs. Nobody was doing this on a professional basis, but yet they had a dream to take rallying to the next level in this country. And I think it helped out that they're based in Detroit, which is the Motor City, obviously. Scott Harvey had some connections with the Big Three, being an engineer at Chrysler, but still, it was pretty much a Herculean effort to lobby, to write the letters, to raise the awareness with the right people in Europe. I know for a fact that a big part of how POR got onto the WRC calendar had to do with an observer that actually came in from the FIA. And he's a legend in motorsports, actually. It was Baron Huschke von Hanstein, who had an incredible background with Porsche. He was one of the original public relations specialists, actually, for Porsche in the 50s. And he had won, some of the biggest road racing events in Europe in the 1940s and 1950s. So incredible road racer. And he actually came to the POR, I believe in 1971, spent a couple of weeks with members of the Detroit SCCA, and pretty much performed a very thorough inspection of how they organized everything, looked at the roads, and made sure that this was actually going to be an event that would be of the caliber to support an international championship event. Now, in 1971, the WRC did not exist. I think 1973 was the first year that they had the Drivers' Championship. 1972 was the International Manufacturers' Championship. And so that's where, when Baron von Hanstein signed off on the event, because everything did meet his approval, then POR got the sanction to be on the International Manufacturers' Championship schedule in 72. And that followed on with WRC in 73 and 74. So it was a really big deal. And again, having somebody like that come over from the FIA's Sporting Commission was just an incredible honor, I know, for a lot of the people that were affiliated with the Detroit SCCA at that time.
And two things actually that I want to make sure we don't gloss over that are a big deal. there was an
Yeah.
American manufacturer that was involved in those early days of the WRC. But in Ford was beyond just those early days, but in the early days there was Jeep, but then also uh, we can't gloss over because everybody really focuses. This is just my own opinion. Everybody wants to focus so much on Olympus and what that was, which it was amazing because the Group B cars are special. They were insanely fast. Having them in the Tacoma Dome is super, super cool. All of that stuff, amazing. And I love the fact that we pay so much attention to it, but we cannot forget 73 and 74 were press on regardless. Honestly, even 72, because really, I mean, that was part of it as well, with the manufacturers championship. But I feel like we forget the fact that it was, there before Olympus was, because I didn't know about press on regardless until this year. Uh, and then I didn't know about Jeep being a part of the WRC until this year. And those are two really big things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the Jeeps, were there in 1972. And in fact, Gene Henderson won the 1972 POR in a Jeep Wagoneer, which was a huge vehicle for that time. It was unheard of for a vehicle that large to participate in any rally, let alone an international sanctioned event. So
Yeah, normally those are
he
rock
had a
crawlers.
multi-car team. Absolutely. And it was almost a joke, the way that he showed up, and he had a very colorful, big personality. He had kind of this presence at the events also, where he called the Jeeps, Moby Dick 2. It was kind of this circus feel, and he was very serious about it though, and he really believed that there was potential in four-wheel drive, which at the time was extremely controversial, because the perspective of the Europeans was that two-wheel drive was a real rally vehicle. So here Henderson shows up with this Jeep team. Nobody really thinks they're going to perform very well, and he does very, very well. And in fact, he had enough time. I can tell you, he had. I think I might be wrong on the exact length, but it was about an 8-minute lead, I think, over the second place competitor. It was enough time for him to get a car wash and clean the Jeep up before he pulled into the final finish in Alma, Michigan. So, he did. It was amazing, and shocked a lot of the purists of the time in European rallying. So it was controversial, but it was also the introduction of four-wheel drive. So as you said, it was really a big turning point, and I think it also kind of captured some hearts here in the United States for rallying. Also, seeing an American-made vehicle perform so well. To follow up on that story about him getting a car wash, though, I remember his son, Gene's son, Mark, telling me that the the powers that be with the Detroit Auto Show called him up a couple of months after the event, and he said, "Hey, Gene, we'd like you to bring your POR winning Jeep to the Detroit Auto Show, and we'd like you to bring it as authentic as you can from the rally if it's still that way." And he said, "Oh no, I washed all the dirt off before the event even ended." And I said, "Well, that's not going to work out." So he had to go, take it out back behind his shop and put a few miles on it and dirty it up before he took it to the auto show. But yeah, Jeep was a great chapter in the history of POR. Gene Henderson, again, I don't think you'd have POR continuing as an event such as it has without him. And it's just one of those great chapters of rally lore. Really colorful character, colorful car. It's important to mention that POR still exists today, even though, again, it fell off of the World Rally Championship calendar in 1974 after the 74 event, continued as a stage rally until 1994, and then reverted back to a TSD rally, kind of going back to its roots. Still organized and presented by the Detroit Region SCCA, but it's today maintained as a very, very brisk and challenging TSD rally, which takes place in northern Michigan, still using a lot of the same roads that it ran in 1968 or 1972, 1974. So the organizer today, or the rally master, I should say, is Bruce Fisher. And he's got a lot of great rally experience in his own past, and he does a great job of bringing up some of these historic roads. So I can tell you, that we still run Connors Flat the first road that was used for a stage rally in the United States routinely during POR. So still a great event, and that's where I go back to my original statement. That TSD rallying is a great way to get into the sport at a very low overhead. Here you can compete in something like the Press On Regardless that has this incredible, amazing history that changed rallying as we know it, and it's still there and available for grassroots competitors with
And in the
basically
past, you
your
competed
daily
in a
driver.
rental car, right? I'm
Yes,
sorry, I didn't
so
mean to
I'll
step
tell that
over you.
story because no, 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 no. I appreciate you keeping me on the path here because again, I can talk about this stuff in any direction you want. But yeah, the story that I'll tell goes back to one of my earlier comments about rallying with my dad because yeah, my dad is a great fan of motorsports. He competed himself in multiple disciplines in the 70s and 80s, but he did not initially get involved in rallying with me. I had been doing rallycross and TSD rallies for 6 or 7 years with a couple of guys I knew from work, and I had a lot of fun, but I was kind of doing it on my own. And then the Press On Regardless rally in 2019 was coming up, and by this point, the first POR I ran was 2014, so this was like my fifth or sixth one, and I was definitely into it. I knew it was a big deal, and I always wanted to be there. So it came down to the very last minute though, and there was no way our car was going to be ready. We had a Subaru WRX, and my normal co-driver, great guy, Tristan Evans. He was the guy that I initially got into TSD rallying with. He just didn't want to do it. Just okay, we're going to go. We're not going to be competitive, so I'll sit this one out, and that's fine. But then I started calling everybody that I knew after that, trying to get another co-driver to run with me, and either nobody was able to do it or they didn't want to. And I don't know if that says anything about my driving or not, but I was really getting concerned right down to the very last minute. So the morning of the event, I called my dad and I said, "Hey, this is really crazy, but would you be willing to go up to West Branch, which is where the rally was starting that year, and run POR with me?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure. I'm not doing anything else." So I was like, "Okay, well, I got my co-driver. Now I need to figure out what I'm going to drive because our car was still in the shop." So sure enough, I went to the local rent-a-car facility and picked up a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and told them that I was going to be out driving around the woods with my dad for the weekend. So that's how we got into it together. We made it to the start of the event just right in the nick of time. We got I think we had about 30 minutes to spare before the event started, but we got our route instructions, got going, and actually we ended up winning the stock class that weekend. So definitely my dad was hooked after that. That was 2019, so I think we've been working together ever since. And today, actually, he is the chairman for Press On Regardless, working with Bruce Fisher, actually organizing the event. So, yeah, so that was a great story. And again, I'll just say, rallying with my dad, I think it's part of what makes rallying more than just a race at this point. Working with him, just the relationship, getting to know him, solving problems together. It all goes back to the fact that rally is very, very special, and there's more to it than just the competition and the car preparation. There's something that's it's very human and almost instructional about it. I think you're competing as much as you're competing with the other cars in the event. You're competing against yourself, you're competing against the elements, you're competing against time, and all these things have innumerable variables. So it's I feel like track racing sometimes is about domination or just you're attacking. Rally is a negotiation, and that's how I look at it anyways, and all these things are factors in that. So that's my rental car story anyway about POR 2019.
It's a great story, and the way that I have, uh, this is more for stage rallying, but the way that I have been, like relaying the idea of rallying to people is like, okay, So NASCAR was founded off of the idea of like the shiners, hey, my car's faster than yours, I can be a better driver, all these things. And it,
Yeah.
those guys were like flying down backwood country roads and everything like that. And, growing up in the Midwest in whenever I was in high school, guess what me and my friends did? We drove like idiots down
Right.
backcountry roads. And I think it's just, it may
Yeah.
not only be a Midwestern thing, but it's definitely a Midwestern thing for sure. And so rallying speaks to all of that. Although one, the roads are closed as long as it's a stage rally, not a TSD. But then uh, there's just so many. It's authentic, it's genuine. There's an intimacy that can't be beat. This honestly, this should be the biggest sport in America, because, or like motorsport in America, just because it speaks to the American spirit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, it's, you go out, you blaze your own trail. You do something, you build it yourself many times, and then you figure it out. And it's you against the elements, which is still kind of it's the continuation of that pioneer spirit in a lot of ways, which is pretty cool. I think it is very attractive. And, it, from a spectator standpoint, I understand that you stand out in the cold for a long time, and you maybe see the cars go by a couple of times, which I think is exciting. But certainly from the competitor's perspective, I think it's just for me anyway, it's endlessly more interesting than um, than a track event or something that would take place on a closed course. That's not to knock any other type of motorsports, because I love it all, but just as a competitor, um, that's one thing that I've loved about rally. I think I was initially drawn into rally because of the seat time. Honestly, as I started getting into motorsports, and then it just kind of opened up from there. I can tell you the story though about how I initially became familiar with rally, because it was not something I grew up with. My background and my family's background in the sport is more with open wheel cars, IndyCar. My grandfather restored classic Indy cars actually, and built sprint cars during the 50s and 60s. And then later he had drag cars and did a lot of other things. And my dad did motocross and go-karts. So I always kind of had that background, and I enjoyed racing. I watched NASCAR and IndyCar as a kid, but I also never really directly participated until I was in my 20s. But the first rally that I ever watched was actually in Iraq. And you mentioned early on that I'm in the Air National Guard here in Michigan. So this was a deployment that I was on in 2009, and we got Al Jazeera TV in Iraq, and I remember very well watching every day the highlights of the Dakar rally. And at that point, Robbie Gordon, was like the only American that was competing, and of course I was familiar with him from IndyCar and NASCAR. And there was one quote that I remember from that event that's always stuck with me, and it was Robbie Gordon talking about how running Dakar was the equivalent to him of running the Daytona 500 or the Indy 500 every day for 2 weeks. And I was like, wow, that really puts it into perspective. I mean, this is a huge undertaking, just the scale, epic scope, and then also the human experience where, I was just watching the Dakar rally today, and somebody put it into a different perspective where they said, what happens to you over 2 weeks at the Dakar happens to a normal person in the course of like 5 years. It's just, it's that demanding. So that's kind of what put the bug in my head that rally was something unique. And then a couple years later, I had another deployment to Afghanistan and came back. And then I was kind of thinking, like, what do I really want to do? And I thought, well, racing is something that I've had this interest in for a long time, and I want to kind of find out where I fit into it all. So I looked at a couple different things. I did a little bit of track racing. I did the Skip Barber driving school for Formula cars, which was really a great experience, but I knew that was not what I wanted to pursue. And then I ended up doing a rallycross and a TSD rally with the Detroit Region SCCA. And like I said, it was the seat time in the TSD rally that at first hooked me. And then, like, well, this is kind of like, the entry level to the stuff that happens overseas and in different places on a much greater scale. So, so that's where rally has just been. It's become my inroad to it all. Although I still love history, like I said, I love every type of motorsport, and I have all these other projects I could talk about also in the motorsports history realm. that touch on Formula One and IndyCar and sports car racing also.
Well, actually, so you had mentioned it in our private messages about what you had been working on, and I
Yeah.
had intentionally because all right. So first of all, I want to table the stuff about like ARA and rallying and stuff for a second. I want to come back to that because I've got some things I want to talk about specifically ARA related, but I want to talk about which you have been working on because I intentionally sidestepped it in our messages because I wanted to like be as like raw reaction with it here because it's really really cool what you just did. You went to Florida to do some research for a new project, and
Yeah.
I mean if you're cool with talking about it right now, we totally can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love this stuff, and I have no problem talking about it. But yeah, so I'm always looking at. I've always got projects, on the side, ongoing about motorsports history. And right now, I have three books that I'm working on. Um, kind of juggling them where I can, but I do feel kind of an urgency to capture this history, which is why I take on a lot because I have to capture. I feel like I have to. Um, I have to seize the opportunity to grab the history when it's there, because if you put it off, it may not be there, down the road. So that's where the three books that I have right now. Number one, pretty obvious, it's the history of the Snowdrift Rally. So I did a book previously on the history of POR, and then really the Snowdrift Rally is interconnected into the history of POR to a vast extent with a lot of the same people. So that's kind of a continuation of that project. And then I also have a book on the motor racing involvement of General Curtis LeMay, who was a famous World War II bomber general, somewhat controversial, but during the 50s, he was very, very involved in motorsports in a way a lot of people don't realize because, frankly, he didn't want a lot of people to know the extent to which he was involved. Because he was a four-star general and he thought that maybe he might get told, to stand down. But the gist of it, to make the long story short, is that the SCCA was having a lot of problems in the early 50s with crowd control and injuries at their sports car races because, again, this is before the advent of purpose-built road courses. Even like sports car racing was taking place on public roads. These aren't rallies, but like flat out sports car races. And they had problems with crowd control. Spectators were getting killed and injured, and the insurance provider for SCCA said we're going to pull the plug. There was also a lot of backlash against racing from like civilian lawmakers, even in Congress and Senate. So Curtis LeMay stepped in and he said, "Okay, I'm a big racing fan." And in fact, he owned a couple of Allard sports cars, which were really, really cool British sports cars of that era, but they had U.S. or American built V8s in them. So basically a hot rod sports car.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but LeMay stepped in and said, okay, I'm going to open up the Air Force bases that I command for sports car racing. It's going to be safer. We can use the Air Force security to cover crowd control. And, we're going to do this. And then we're also going to charge a nominal fee. So then those monies will go into improving living conditions for our airmen. So so I've got three projects ongoing right now on the motorsports history side, and I might have mentioned it earlier, but I feel an urgency to capture this history sometimes because you have to take advantage of the opportunities while they're there. If you wait, the history might be gone, or you may not have those resources available down the road. So that's why. I got three things ongoing right now, working on them as I can in between other projects. But the first book I'm doing is on the history of the Snowdrift Rally. Pretty obvious, and that's very, very deeply intertwined with the history of the Press On Regardless Rally, which I did a book on already a few years ago. So that's kind of a natural fit. And then the second book I have ongoing is on the racing involvement of General Curtis LeMay, who was a pretty famous World War II bomber general. And then he commanded the Strategic Air Command during the Cold War. But LeMay was a big sports car fan. and he actually owned a couple of Allards himself, which the Allard was a British sports car, but they always had an American V8, so kind of a hot rod take on a British sports car, which was pretty cool for its day. Almost a forerunner to the Corvette in some respects, but that's a different story. Um, the thing about LeMay though is that while he was kind of at the peak of his career, the SCCA was having a lot of problems with crowd control and spectator fatalities and injuries actually. So races were taking place on public roads. This is sports car racing, not rallies, but they were racing on public roads and people were getting hurt and killed. So the SCCA's insurance provider said, "We're going to cut you off." And at that point, LeMay stepped in and said, "Okay, well, I'd like to see the SCCA move on to the Air Force bases that I command. We're going to open these bases up, and the Air Force is going to provide security and crowd control so that the cars can keep running and the passionate participants and spectators can continue enjoying the sport they love." And then they also charged a nominal admission for the races once they moved on the Air Force bases, which went to like providing better living conditions and resources for the military members and their families. So there were a couple of facets there. That went on from 1952 to 1954, where the Strategic Air Command was basically hosting SCCA road racing, and that was enough time actually for the first purpose-built road courses in the United States to really get up and running. So during that time, Watkins Glen, Road America, was being thought of at that time. And then in California, you had Willow Springs, and then not too long after that, Riverside. So LeMay was actually pretty instrumental in keeping SCCA road racing relevant. And we would probably know road racing in a different form than what we do today if it was not for him. He was also doing a lot of really cool other stuff, or other things that were really cool at the time that a lot of people don't realize. He had acquired an Indy car. It was an old Curtis Craft Indy car from 1950 that Andy Granatelli had actually commissioned and competed with. Different driver, but Andy Granatelli owned it. And anyway, LeMay brought the car into a hobby shop at one of his Air Force bases and had the idea to put a Boeing turbine engine into this Indy car. So it's an airplane jet engine, basically. And, he kind of passed it off as an experiment. He was trying to encourage some mechanical skills development for his airmen and stuff. But really, he was involved working on this thing himself. And I've got pictures of him involved with it. But this engine worked out pretty well. It performed admirably. And LeMay was testing it himself on the runways off at Air Force Base. So they took it to the Indy 500 in 1955, and of course it couldn't compete because nobody knew what to do with an Indy car with an airplane engine at the time. But it turned a lot of heads, and Andy Granatelli, who was a famous Indy car owner and designer, actually took notice because it was one of his old Indy cars that they had used for this experiment. And then Granatelli went on. 12 years later, he came back to the Indy 500 with his own turbine-powered cars, which were a revolution at the time. Very controversial. There's a whole story about them. But in 1967 and 1968, those were kind of the story of the moment at the Indy 500. And there's a bunch of other stuff. So that's the second project that I've got. The third project, which goes back to your comment about having just been down in Florida, is a project that I've been involved with for about a decade now, actually. And it is the story of Lance Raventlow and the creation, basically, of the Scarab sports car and the Scarab Formula One car, which was the first ever Formula One car built in the United States. And fascinating story. I could talk all day about this stuff, but the upshot is that Lance Raventlow was the son of a woman named Barbara Hutton, who was a major heiress and kind of a media celebrity of the 1930s, kind of like the Kardashians would be today. Super wealthy, super rich. She was married to like 7 different guys. One of her husbands was the actor Cary Grant, and then she was also married to two race car drivers.
Okay,
So
so
Lance, yeah, go ahead.
The Hutton name sounded familiar, and that's why, because like, uh,
Yeah.
my mom actually showed me the movie Arsenic and Old Lace, and a
Oh
couple
yeah,
other
yeah,
Cary Grant movies,
yeah,
and so yeah, whoop, I kicked my tripod there, but I am familiar with Cary Grant, and I knew he was
yeah,
married several times, and I know like the name sounded familiar whenever you said Hutton, and I was like, why does that sound familiar? And
yeah.
now I know why.
So Barbara Hutton again had all the money from the Woolworth dime store fortune. That's where her family got their money from. But Lance, her son, kind of grew up in her shadow. Didn't really have a lot of direction in his life, and as he was getting into his later teens and early 20s, he really felt a strong drive to do something on his own. Something that showed that he was capable of doing something other than inheriting money, basically. So he had always kind of been drawn to race cars. Again, he had two stepfathers that raced. Actually, one of his stepfathers, long story, was the first driver that Ferrari actually had in Formula One. But again, that's a different tangent. Anyway, Lance gravitated towards auto racing, but he was really interested more from like the design and construction perspective. His best friend in high school was a guy named Bruce Kessler, who was a very active driver, even in his teens. Like 17 and 18 years old, he was showing real potential, and was on the radar of a lot of the major teams in California, and probably was looked upon as like Formula One material someday. But Lance's buddy Bruce was being mentored by this guy named Warren Olson, and Warren and his wife Simone owned a sports car shop in California. Anyway, they connected with Lance, and it was like a family unit that Lance had never really had before in his life. So where he had grown up in this super super rich, super wealthy environment, almost disconnected to reality, he soon found like real people that he connected with, respected their talent and their ingenuity when it came to engineering and maintenance on sports cars. And pretty soon he's thinking that he might like to build his own car, and he knew that he had the resources to do that. And this was something that he could kind of show that he was again more than just about inheriting money. So some time goes by. Anyway, Lance starts racing himself, and he goes to Europe racing Maseratis. And he's not really that impressed with the European sports cars that he sees. And actually, he and his buddy Bruce Kessler went to one of the sports car shops in England, and they were looking at the chassis, and Lance is like, "This is a piece of junk. I could build something better than this." So they go back to California, and with Warren Olson in charge, they decide to build a car that Lance eventually named the Scarab, which was kind of a joke because the Scarab is, of course, a dung beetle. So he's self-deprecating about it, but Lance probably had a lot more engineering background and knowledge, self-taught, than most people realize. But what he really was good at was allowing Warren Olson and like leveraging connections. So Lance Reventlow, although he probably had a lot more engineering knowledge that was self-taught than most people realized, was really really what he did that was incredible was with the wherewithal he had, and then also the connections through Warren Olson and the resources that he was able to bring in. In about 1958, he brought together probably one of, if not the greatest racing teams ever assembled in the history of American motorsports. The car that he wanted to build was called the Scarab, which was again kind of a joke. The Scarab is of course a dung beetle, but he was really serious about it, and he brought in all types of racing backgrounds. He had designers from IndyCar, he had hot rodders, drag racers, sports car specialists. He even had the guy who had designed the Offenhauser engine for IndyCars like in 1930, working for a while on one of the engines that the team developed. So anyway, really it was like the combination of everything done up to that time in American auto racing. And together they built this sports car that was phenomenal. It's called the Scarab again, and it dominated American sports car racing in 1958. So with the success that they had running this design, custom designed sports car with a Chevy V8 engine, it was bored out to basically 5.5 liters. Um, they thought they could take their success and go to Europe. So the next step in the development of their team was actually to get into Formula One. Um, they started out with a really good plan, and again, they had the best designers at the time. They had the most talented fabricators, but as any racing team would do, they were trying a little bit of everything, and they were trying to be better than the competition, not just copying what they knew they were going to be up against in Europe. But at the same time, there in California, there's a lot of technological advances that were happening in Europe at that time. And again, I'm cutting through a lot of the story for the sake of time, but basically, through attempting to innovate and coming up with something better than the competition, the car ended up taking 2 years longer to complete than they had originally anticipated. And in that time, there had been a revolution in design in Formula One on the European side where basically all the chassis were now configured around a rear engine design as opposed to front engine design. And Lance's team had designed a front engine Formula One car. So they went to Europe in 1960. The car was basically obsolete before it actually showed up on the grid, and it was not successful, unfortunately, during the 1960 season. They made 2 Formula One races that year, one in Spa, Belgium, and then the other at Riverside in California. Their best finish was 10th. So the F1 car was not a success, and after that, Lance built a couple other cars, but never really had the same success that he had in 1958. And in 1962, the IRS actually came after him because there's a law in tax code that says if you have a business and do not make a profit in 5 years, you don't really have a business, you have a hobby. So you can no longer write off your expenses for tax purposes. So Lance saw the writing on the wall, and he knew it was time to get out of racing, but he had this purpose-built facility and this incredible team assembled. And about that time, a guy named Carroll Shelby came along with an idea to develop the Cobra. And that's where he and Lance connected anyway. Shelby took over Lance's operation, including the facility that they had built the Scarabs in, the last Scarabs. And then several of Reventlo's key employees went on to work for Shelby, including Warren Olson. So the foundation that he built, even though the F1 cars were not successful, went on to do great things through Shelby. And then they also inspired Dan Gurney, who was another great F1 driver of the 1960s, to build his own American Formula One car, the Eagle, which won the Belgian Grand Prix in 1967. So again, long story short, cutting to the very core of this, I got involved in the project about 10 years ago when a lot of these team members were still alive. Lance died in 1972 in a plane crash, unfortunately. But Warren Olson was still around. Bruce Kessler was still around. And they were more than happy to share their memories of the team, of Lance. And I think what we're going to have with the book is just a very interesting human story, plus the foundation of one of the most remarkable teams and the foundation for so much more in American motorsports than a lot of people realize. So I was just in Florida anyway last week. I had the chance to go and meet with a guy named Don Devine, who was one of the drivers of the Scarab sports cars a little bit later on after Lance had sold them. But he's also a great enthusiast and has so many stories of racing from that era. It was really a lot of fun. And then at the Revs Institute Museum in Naples, Florida, I had a chance to actually look at one of the original Scarab sports cars and go over the blueprints from one of the F1 cars. So a lot of fun. Again, this is a long-term project, but we hope to be done with it in 2027, which will be the 70th anniversary of the Scarab. And I know for me, the hardest part is going to be deciding when it actually is done and just saying, okay, I'm going to let go of this project because it's been a passion for again, more than a decade at this point. So if you want to read an interesting story, that's already out there, there's a lot of Wikipedia and stuff about Lance and the Scarabs. That's, just a thumbnail of the story. So I encourage anybody that's interested to check that stuff out. And then hopefully in a couple of years, you'll have a book as well.
I'm gonna wait for the in-depth book, and then I'm gonna have Speechify read it to me because uh,
Yeah.
I don't actually have like time to like sit down and read the way I want to. So I got to do a lot of stuff through audio, and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to whenever you get it finished and you get it out there. So I already have this on my reading material for 2027. And I understand the urgency aspect of uh, a writing project because I started thinking about this about the same time as like you and I got connected.
Mhm.
There is a story within duck hunting that is a really big ordeal. It's called The Day That Duck Hunters Died, and it's about the 1940 Armistice Day. There was a
Okay.
blizzard that rolled through, and it came through the Midwest, like so, like Michigan, Wisconsin, down, and so it hit like Indiana, Missouri, and even like the tip of Arkansas, like the top part of
Mhm.
Arkansas. It was just tons of snow and just crazy bad weather. And prior to that blizzard, we had an abnormally like warm fall, like
Wow.
kind of like what we had this year, where it was 70s and even 80s at times and stuff.
Mhm.
And uh, then just out of nowhere, obviously back then, their weather technology wasn't the same as it is now. So guys saw the ducks on the front end of the storm and we're just having a great hunt. And then all of a sudden, the storm hits and they're thinking, it's just a little bit of snow or, a little bit of ice, no big deal. They deal with it all the time being duck hunters. And then by the time they're, all right, I got my limit, it's time to pack up. Wait a minute, I can't get out. And then
Oh.
these guys were stuck and were either, found ways to survive the night or a bunch of them perished. I can't
Mhm.
remember how many duck hunters did end up dying, but there was quite a few. But there was this one guy from, I want to say, Mason City, Iowa, that ended up being
Wow.
like a hero who got up in his little plane and was like flying around dropping like safety packages to people. It would have like a small thing of whiskey. It would have some matches, a couple of smokes, and a sandwich. And I want to say there was something else in there, but I can't remember what. But basically, it was stuff to like help them get through that little bit of time before somebody could get to them. And he'd be like, help's on the way, and he would circle over them until somebody got to him. And he did this repeatedly until he saved a bunch of people. I can't even remember how many people he saved, but I'm looking for any stories from like anywhere in the Midwest region that was affected by the blizzard of, at this point, I figure most of them have passed on by now. So I'm even looking just for the relatives that are like, oh yeah, grandpa used to talk about this or whatever,
Right.
because it's a story that enamors me. Just
Right.
because I am a duck hunter and, I living for those moments where the weather is rough, where, most people are like, oh, I want to stay inside. I'm like, I know what's out there waiting for me. I gotta go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, uh, there's definitely time is of the essence with those stories, and I know it. And so I
Yeah.
feel you there with that. But back to
Yep.
the ARA,
Yeah.
because like we've talked about manufacturers and other motorsports here for a little
Yeah.
bit. But the cool thing about the ARA is we have grassroots meets manufacturers. So like Subaru used to have a WRC manufacturer team, like
Mhm.
a world rally team, if you will. And then they decided to scale back in '08 because of the recession and everything. And
Mhm.
Vermont's sports car really like took the manufacturer side of it here in the Americas and made something really cool with it. Ken Block has raced for him, Brandon Semeniuk as of recent years, and Travis
Right.
Pastrana for a lot of years as well have been out of that Vermont sports car team, and we've had that one manufacturer, if you will, really be a big part of ARA. But then there's all kinds of independents like yourself that go in there and race, and so it's really that grassroots, independence meets manufacturers, and that's the cool thing about the ARA is all that gets mixed together. However, this year we're going to have another manufacturer involved with Toyota announcing from the World Rally Team that they're bringing Rally 2 Corollas, which they hadn't made a Rally 2 Corolla until this year. And so it makes it more unique, and it definitely, like, the world's eyes are on our title, our national title, and our eyes should be on it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I love your point, about the uh, the factory involvement through Vermont Sports Car. You've got the, you know, all the resource and everything behind that. Then you've also got the independence. Um, ARA, is an awesome venue because you do have people from all over, the United States, all walks of life. People are coming together from different perspectives to compete. But I would say, kind of um, in response or to add to your comment, this all goes back to the fact that rally, just like we said, is the most authentic sport, or the most authentic venue in motorsports right now. Um, it's stock car racing, really, because again, you can buy, a Subaru Impreza, or you can buy a Toyota Corolla. There's going to be a lot more stock than anything you see in NASCAR these days. So I just think it is a very unique, and I think it's a huge opportunity, a very unique venue though for constructors, for factory teams, and then for independents to get out there and and see what it's like to compete against the big guns, really. But I think it all just goes back, like I said, to the fact that rally, it's real cars on real roads, real people, and again, like, you can't get more authentic than being out there on the stages where anything literally can happen.
For real. Um,
Yeah.
hmm, where was I going with this? I mean, you know, rallies is crazy because one stage, if you're looking at stage ones and not TSD ones, you can be way in the lead, and then all of a sudden you get a puncture, or you know, heaven forbid you have a rollover or something, and all of a sudden you went from being in the lead by 2 minutes or whatever to now being in 10th place, being down 25 minutes or whatever.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
it's a really crazy thing where anything can happen.
I mean, I can tell you, and again, like, we're not coming at the sport from the same perspective as, Brandon Semenek or somebody that's got factory backing, but I can tell you that like, it's always risk management, in my head when I'm in the car. Because again, you know that you can lose a whole lot more time with a turn that goes wrong than you can with, maybe driving, 9/10 or 8/10 or a little bit more than you would on the previous turn. So there's always a lot more to lose, than to gain. And so it's that risk management piece. But yeah, you just it's a battle more against the conditions and more against the rally itself almost than it is the other competitors. And again, that's one reason why I think it's so compelling. So I kind of trailed off on that one a little bit too. Maybe I'm getting tired.
No, I think you handled it
Yeah.
great. Uh, Spoiler alert for people that are listening to this, though, we are recording late in the evening, but um, and and that is true with what you've brought up, though, because you're not in an open 4-wheel drive car. You're in a uh, I'm not. What class do you run in? Is it the limited 4-wheel drive, like for the regional, or oh,
So we run the naturally aspirated all-wheel drive class. Um, Lately, we've been doing the nationals. So Snowdrift this last year and LSPR last year. We actually ran the national category. Um, but some more stuff that I would just add, about the nature of rally. We say press on regardless, and that's not just a slogan, or an event name. Really that's what it takes to win. And another quote that's always stuck with me from rally, I think was from Carlos Sainz, who's one of the big Dakar rally competitors, and he said something along the lines of, "You have to go slow enough to win," basically, which to me goes back to that risk management piece. So it's not flat out. I mean, again, you're trying to go faster than the next guy, but a lot of times just getting to the finish is a victory in and of itself. And I think that's what I've experienced, at an event like LSPR, where it's notoriously treacherous. The attrition rate is very high. That you're lucky when you make it to the finish, or At Snowdrift, you're lucky when the snowbank didn't bite you, and maybe you finished a little better than you should have. Again, it's you're going back to that battle with the conditions in the event, and I think that's again, it's another component that you're not necessarily going to get in track racing. So, Ernest Hemingway said something that this isn't a direct correlation with rally, but with motorsports in general. He said, or he was attributed to saying it. I don't know if he actually did, but it was something to the effect of, there were only three true sports, motorsports being one of them, bullfighting another, and then mountain climbing. And I think what he was getting after, was like the man against machine, man against animal, and then man against the natural elements. And I think we don't really have the animals in rally, but you definitely have two of the three with the machines and the natural elements. So I think, again, Ernest Hemingway's comment that those are the three sports, the rest are just games, holds true. So I always have liked that.
That's a really good quote, and I haven't heard that one before. And Hemingway is a really interesting character. Like, well, I say character, but like an interesting person because, he was a writer, he was an outdoorsman, he was all these different
Yeah.
things. Very much like a American Renaissance man in his own right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, especially like on like people my age, and it gets lost because he was very, very cultural and very
Mm-hmm.
educated, and definitely gave back to, I get, for lack of a better term, the arts with his writing.
Yeah. 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 I'm a huge Hemingway fan. He spent a lot of time in northern Michigan, so I've always been connected, especially to some of the stuff he wrote about, in that part of the state. But yeah, I just appreciate the fact that he was always after the truth. He was always boiling it down to the most direct, kind of the clearest heart of whatever he was experiencing, whether it was in war or travel or adventure, anything like that. But I know you wanted to talk about music also, and I don't know, maybe I can recommend a segue here because I think talking kind of about the literary influences. Of course, I'm a writer and I see everything that way, but music also, I know is something you wanted to talk about. So if I can, I guess, take the opportunity to start talking about another one of my heroes, who is Bob Dylan, of course. Um, this might be a good time because it might surprise you, but I think I can draw a circle back from Bob Dylan to motorsports and kind of at least the way I approach racing and especially the historical piece of it because I've always loved Bob Dylan. I think for about 20 years I've followed his stuff. I first became familiar when I was about 15, and you know of course he's a musical figure, a musical icon, but for me he's always been like a literary guy, almost like Hemingway. He's a documenter of American history, and that's where if you listen to Dylan's music, I think you'll get a sense of the history of and development of American music. Because particularly in some of his later stuff, he's always mining back into traditions and lyrics and paying homage to people that have influenced him. So I really admire that, and of course he just uses words better than practically everybody else. Also, so I like that about his work. But um, he views things, and this really became clear to me reading his book, The Philosophy of Modern Song, that came out a few years ago. He views things as a giant puzzle, and that's why he loves the American musical landscape. It's like he's plugging in and connecting all these dots with various influences, where everybody has heard something that then influenced what they did, and vice versa. And we're all connected in this tradition, and I think that's kind of the core of his body of work. So I really relate to that with the research that I do, and my involvement in racing, actually, because again, you can draw a connection from the 1949 Press On Regardless rally and these guys that wanted to get together and run British sports cars through the woods, to what we're doing now at LSPR. And along the way, you can make the connection between the Jeep and the World Rally Championship, things that are going on in Europe, everything is connected, if you want to pull that string long and hard enough. So I love that. That's one of the things that drives me to find the next piece of the puzzle, or talk to the person that has the story that's kind of the missing link that connects something else, because everybody gets an idea for what they're doing from someplace. And really, racing is a small community, so it's probably easier in motorsports to put those pieces together than it is other ways. So that's one thing I love about Bob Dylan. I've seen him 10 times in concert, and that's just another thing on the musical side. 10 times I've seen him in 3 different countries, and no 2 shows are the same. So I love the way that he's always innovating, right? He's always changing and creating, or like before your eyes, on the stage. He's updating lyrics on the fly for stuff that he wrote in the 70s. And, sometimes, unless you actually really know the songs, they're pretty hard to recognize, actually. Probably frustrates some people, but I love that because, you're watching somebody, who's just constantly finding new meanings behind things and always reinventing himself, actually, which I think probably is why he's maintained the relevance that he has for 6 decades. So anyway, I could talk about Bob Dylan for a long time, but I'll pause there.
Well, so I'm like, everything you said about Dylan is very much accurate and very much relatable and understandable, because the way he does things is very, very much everything that you said. And I personally, I've never really been like a huge Bob Dylan fan. I love what he did with Johnny Cash, like all the stuff that he did with Johnny Cash, especially "Girl from the North Country." But
Yep.
whenever I listen to his folky stuff on his own, it's like, okay, I get it, but his version of folky stuff just isn't necessarily for me. But he is an incredible musician with an incredible mind, especially the fact that, like you said, he's been doing this for 6 decades, and he has, he can even update it on the fly even nowadays with what he's doing. And so, still sharp up top and able to do all those different things. He recently, I want to say it was last year, was on tour with Willie Nelson. Two guys that are still out there just absolutely making amazing music. And most of like my guys that I was a big fan of are gone. Waylon Jennings is my favorite country music artist, and then Johnny Cash. Both are no longer here. And to see that Willie and Dylan still doing it is absolutely amazing. And they've been able to share the stage with all different kinds of people, including Willie's son, Lucas Nelson. I do have a question for you, though. What other countries other than America have you seen Bob Dylan in?
Oh, I saw him in Canada, which is not too far. I mean, that's pretty easy for us in Michigan. I was just over in Ontario, and then in Germany also, which is pretty cool. And I think it was a lot of fun, to see other people getting excited about him, and in a different location, a different country. I think it was just a really neat experience. So I love Bob Dylan, though, and talking about his folk era to his electric era and all this stuff. Actually, my favorite period of Bob Dylan's career is a period a lot of people say actually is one of his overlooked periods, I guess, and that's the 70s, like late 70s and 80s. Because I think it probably wasn't the best time in his life, but that was when he was really, I think, like working on this reinvention piece. And I think some of the songs that he wrote then were just incredible. And the thing that's always amazed me about him is that they keep releasing these bootleg collections. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's all of the material that didn't end up on the albums, that we've traditionally become accustomed to hearing. And I think that some of that stuff that actually didn't go onto the albums, particularly from like the 70s and 80s, is the best material of his career, in my opinion. It's the stuff I love the most because it's like unedited and very, very raw and really, really, it's like the mind behind it is just incredible. So I love Bob Dylan, always have, and he's a great influence. And I love the fact, like you mentioned, that he's still on tour, but he typically tours in very small auditoriums, small towns. I think that's part of what keeps him going, it seems like. But yeah, just a lot of respect for the guy, and Certainly, I think one of the great artists of our time.
I totally agree because I mean he's a staple in American, I guess, pop culture is the term that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And to have done it again for 6 decades is incredible.
Yep.
And I do think a lot of that has to do with, like you said, doing the small, more intimate shows and stuff like that. Because whenever he did the tour with Willie Nelson, it was like the first time in I don't know how long that he had performed like here in Missouri, anyways, where he had performed at a big outdoor venue. Because that's where we had it was
Yeah.
it's called like Riverport, and I can't remember how many. Well, it's not called Riverport nowadays. That's dating myself too. Uh, but it's called like Hollywood Casino Amphitheater or something like that nowadays. But that place seats, man, I want to say like 5,000 because like it's got a big lawn area, like a hill that you can sit on, and then it's got quite a few, stadium seats too down, in the front rows. And I don't know the last time that he'd played there because like within my lifetime,
Yeah.
I can't ever think of, an advertised event where he had played it there other than this one. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big deal in
Yeah.
itself.
So one more thing to connect Bob Dylan back to auto racing. So I told the story earlier about Lance Ravello, the book I'm doing with the first American Formula One car, the Scarab. So a great story that I happened upon about Lance Ravello um, involves Bob Dylan. And the connection here is actually that after Lance got out of racing in the early 60s, he was in Los Angeles and was friends with the manager for the Byrds, which of course was a LA-based rock band. They were famous for actually covering some of Bob Dylan's songs, like "Mr. Tambourine Man." And anyway, Lance would throw these parties at his house, and he would invite bands that were kind of getting started or that he liked to come and play at his parties. So one night he hired the Byrds to come and perform, and they did. And actually, Bob Dylan showed up because this was around the time that they were covering "Mr. Tambourine Man." And then the next day, Lance took them all for a ride on his boat, which was actually a catamaran out on the Atlantic. So that was pretty cool. And I got that story from Chris Hillman, actually, who was one of the original band members with the Byrds. So I love that because, of course, Lance Ravello, I've been into his story for so long. And then Bob Dylan, also great connection.
That's a really cool tie for you. Uh, Now,
Yeah.
from a writer's standpoint, do you listen to music whenever you write, or do you like it quiet whenever you write? Because I'm like I like noise
No,
of some sort.
I think I like it quiet, to be honest. Um, I think I'm pretty focused just on what I'm doing with the writing. I do like to listen to music though at different times, if I'm in the car or something. But I think writing, I'm pretty much locked in, and I like to have no other distractions while I'm going back and forth. And actually, for me, the writing is more about like again, there's two phases. There's kind of the construction or the connection of everything where I'm doing the research, and a lot of times I'm directly, writing a draft as I'm looking at the source documents. Then I'll go back and polish again later. So there's a couple different phases, and I guess if I have a process, that's what I could describe it as. But another guy that I'll mention, just because I think it's interesting, and I am a big fan, and I think he's been kind of an influence on how I view writing and racing both. A lot of people are not going to recognize the name, but it's Johnny Halliday, who is a French rock and roll icon, actually. And I got a full disclaimer, like I'm not even a fluent French speaker, but I became familiar with Johnny Halliday's stuff about 10 years ago, and I just love the guy because he's so passionate, and everything that he sings, it's like you don't need the translation because passion needs no translation. And I really got interested in his story also because he was a rally racer, amateur level, but he did run the Monte Carlo Rally in a deal with Ford Motor Company in 1967, and then he remained connected to the sport and came back and ran Dakar in 2003 and a few other events also leading up to that. So he kind of sings like he's on a rally stage to my ears anyway. And in France, he was just an icon, probably bigger than Elvis. And it's funny, as an American, I've spent a little bit of time over there, and couple times it's come up that I really enjoy his stuff, and I think a lot of people are like, wow, oh, that's pretty cool. But anyway, he's a great character, and there was a really good Netflix documentary series that came out about his life a couple of years ago. So if you're interested in just a unique kind of little known rock and roll character that also had a connection to motorsports, Johnny Halliday is a really interesting guy to look into.
I'm gonna have to watch the documentary because like I love watching the documentaries about different uh musical like artists, bands, etc. Uh, one of my favorite ones that I ever came across was actually one about Metallica while they were writing the Black Album, like the one that has Enter
Okay.
Sandman and Unforgiven and Sad But True and a lot of it was a lot of hits. And basically like they started off with they had just come done, or I can't speak because it's late, I guess, but they had just finished you know touring for Injustice for All and stuff, and they went to do this album, and then like towards the end of it, James Hetfield loses his voice, and they're sitting there still trying to get a couple of the songs recorded, and there's one part in particular where he's mad at Lars, the drummer, and he's like, "I wouldn't ask you to do a drum roll if your arm fell off." And th- those kind of documentaries show all different kinds of intimate moments that you wouldn't see if they weren't filming, and so I really appreciate those a lot. So I'm gonna have to check that out. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send you a
one
link for it. Yeah.
Oh, please do. One thing though, here as we get ready to wrap up, Michigan, obviously, like you being from Michigan and everything, in the United States, I don't think people understand like how much history is tied to Michigan because we have, the Detroit, area where all of our automakers were from. A lot of our steel and ore and everything was right there, which is why our automakers were there. And then on top of that, uh, you know, a lot of musicians and stuff are from there. Like more recently, uh, Billy Strings is from Traverse City, and he actually looping back through some other stuff. Uh, he covered, and I'll explain why it's looping back through for some other stuff here in just a second. He covered the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and
Okay.
the only
Yeah.
place I can find it is on YouTube. But the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is actually kind of how I ended up meeting you because I had listened to
Yeah.
the book by John U. Bacon, and then it got me thinking of a couple of ideas, and it inspired me, much like how we were just talking about music and inspiring us to do different things and all the different influences within ourselves. With like with racing and even with music and everything, where somebody inspires somebody, and uh, that book inspired me to start focusing on some a particular thing in rallying, and I reached out to somebody and they were like, you got to talk to this guy, and that's how we got linked up, and we started talking about the press on regardless. And uh, I actually want to have Bruce on here because he has a story about the 1975 press on regardless, about trying to get home in the storm that sank the Edmund Fitzgerald, which obviously is a tragic thing, but it has become a huge part in American lore or American history, uh,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was a rock star for its time. The boat was.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And yeah, I think a lot of rallyists have memories. Anybody that was there certainly have memories of that storm that was right at the very end of the 1975 Press On Regardless rally. So it was a crazy connection, and I'm glad you reached out to me. Couldn't agree more though about the place that that song and the ship has in American lore. And just from the Michigan perspective, I would add to your list of musical connections, Motown out of Detroit, also huge influence, in the 60s
Massive.
on just public consciousness. Yeah, huge. So, so yeah, so there's lots of little tidbits. And Yeah, I think that's I just from the rallying perspective, I'm grateful that I'm here in Michigan because it is kind of one of the hotbeds and one of the places where American rallying got its feet. And I didn't realize that necessarily when I got involved in rally. It was something that I discovered along the way, but it certainly has it's enriched my enjoyment of the sport. It's been something that I, obviously have adopted as a passion, and everything works out for a reason, right? So I can't help but feel that it was all meant to be, and probably meant to be that we connected and you sent out that message on Facebook also. So I'm glad you did.
Oh man, I'm so glad that I did. I've kept you for a lengthy amount of time tonight, and I really appreciate you taking your time to talk about rallying with me to hopefully, bring more awareness to the sport here in our, nation. And I made the joke to you whenever we were talking about recording this, but I'm pretty big in Brazil. Hopefully, our listeners from outside of the states enjoyed it as well. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. Can people like follow you anywhere, like on social medias or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got an Instagram. It's just Andrew Layton underscore racing. So yeah, you can follow my stuff on there. I've got a lot of posts about my life in West Africa also, which we didn't really get into here. But I have not competed in rally in Africa, although I would love to. But for work, I do have the opportunity to drive from Liberia to Sierra Leone every once in a while. So the classic Dakar rallies of the '80s when they went through West Africa and stuff is never far from my mind when that's going on. But yeah, it's all about connections and reaching out and finding mutual passions. So if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out, they're more than welcome to. I love this stuff, and again, I'll talk at any length. So I appreciate you listening, and it's been a lot of fun.
It has been a ton of fun, but we didn't get to the West Africa stuff. So I guess maybe there will be a part two.
Yeah, I mean there could be absolutely anytime.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. You have a wonderful night, and good luck this upcoming season in all of your rallying endeavors. And good luck on your books.
Hey, sounds good. Thanks a lot. Same to you. Hope to
All
see
right.
you at a
Bye.
rally.
I'm hoping to. That'd be awesome. I'd love to come
Hey,
up to
thanks.
LSPR this year.
Hey, you got a place, man. Like I said, we're always looking for help.
Guys, it was great having Andrew on. What a great way to kick off the year, talking about some rallying, some music, just all kinds of great stuff. Not music history, racing history. From kitchen. You know what? We're just gonna do it. Time to eat. So y'all have a good one and happy Monday. We will see you next week right here on Tin Roof Podcast.